I just want to offer you one of my macro thoughts before speaking to my guest. I never cease to be grateful for everything in my life. I'm truly a blessed man. But one of those things is I have the ability to talk to almost anybody I want to talk to. And they're almost always people who think. I'm not interested in, it doesn't mean they're bad or anything. I'm just not interested in people with power. I'm interested in people who make people think. And here is a perfect example. Marian Tupy, a man, by the way, Marian, he comes from Europe. Tupy, T-U-P-Y, he is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. And he has an important book out, which I am glad to bring to your attention, which he co-authored with Gail Pooley. Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. IBP. I like that acronym. An infinitely bountiful planet. Well, Marian Tupy, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a delight. So, in a nutshell, what is your thesis?
For a very long time, for about 2,500 years, people have been wondering about the relationship between population growth and resources. And for most of that time, people thought that when you have population growth, resources are going to become exhausted. They will come to an end. And when that happens, a lot of people are going to die. In this book, we have looked at prices of resources going back all the way to 1850. And what we found was that on average, every 1% increase in population reduces prices of resources by about 1%.
That's what we have right. So forgive me, that's completely, as you point out, counterintuitive. The more people, after all, we have supply and demand, right? So the more demand, you would think that the prices would go up. How do you explain this?
Every person who comes to the world doesn't come with only empty stomach, but also with a pair of hands and, much more importantly, with a brain. So the more people we have, the more innovation in the world we can have. And that innovation translates itself in a number of ways. For example, we can find new deposits of raw materials. We can create efficiencies so that instead of using 3 ounces for a can of Coke, 3 ounces of tin for a can of Coke, you now have to use only half an ounce. We can substitute one resource for another. We no longer kill whales in order to create candles out of them. Instead, we have power stations, electric power stations powered by anything from oil to gas to nuclear power. So Thomas Sowell, the great American economist, likes to say that the caveman had exactly the resources that we had, and that's absolutely true. And the difference between the caveman's standard of living and our standard of living is only knowledge, the knowledge that we bring to the resources that we have, and we are able to create infinitely more value out of those resources than the caveman could.
That's great. Do you, I'm sure you do, I don't remember the names, but there was a huge bet, was it in the 1970s, about prices of resources? Robert Ehrlich, I think, or something Ehrlich, correct? Tell us about that.
In 1968, a Stanford biologist called Paul Ehrlich came up with a very popular book. It sold 3 million copies. It was called Population Bomb. And what Ehrlich predicted was that in the 1970s and 1980s, hundreds of millions of people were going to die, no matter what humanity did, because population growth was going to overtake our ability to produce food, and there was going to be mass starvation. On the other side of the country, at the University of Maryland, an economist by name of Julian Simon challenged him to a wager. He said, Ehrlich, pick any commodities you want, any time you want, and let's bet on what is going to happen to the price of those resources in the future. And Ehrlich picked 5 metals, and the wager was for $1,000 for 10 years. And the wager came to an end in 1990. And the prices of all those metals have declined on an average by 36%. And so Ehrlich had to send Simon a check for $576 adjusted for inflation.
It's a great story. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. It's called Superabundance. And it's sort of required reading for the thinking person. You know, I often reflect, I have now for years, should the West collapse, which is possible because good ideas do not overtake bad ideas regularly in human history. It's an optimistic naivete or a naive optimism. Bad ideas frequently triumph. In fact, they usually triumph. So our love of liberty, at least the half of this country that loves liberty, maybe our idea will not prevail as it has from 1776. So what is my point? My point is that it will never be able to be said that the case for good ideas was not made well during the terrible times that America was and its foundational values were attacked. This is an example, this book, which is just published, and I have the author, Marian Tupy, who is originally from, I guess what was then Czechoslovakia, and he explained to me before the show, South Africa and Britain and now America. He's on his way to Brazil. No, that was completely silly, but I like being silly. And he is with the Cato Institute. The book is Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. So he just recollected at my prompting, I remember, I'm old enough to remember that bet. The Stanford professor who said that because population will outstrip resources, vast numbers of people, millions, will die. And he was like the alarmist climate change people today, the existential threat to humanity. I want to get to climate change in a moment. But first, I'm curious, did the idea that there are too many people die with Ehrlich?
Well, Ehrlich is still alive, actually.
I know, I'm sorry. Did he die with the bet? That's what I meant to be. Yeah.
No, well, it didn't. It very much depends on who you look at. A lot of smart economists and a lot of smart environmentalists have now departed from that idea, and they don't believe it. So our book, for example, got a very nice endorsement from Jason Furman, who is a Democrat, also from Larry Summers. However, the public opinion is still saturated with Malthusian ideas. And let me give you one horrific example. There was a young man who killed 22 people in El Paso Walmart about 3 years ago. And he left behind him a manifesto, which basically said, people are using too many resources. You people will not stop. Therefore, I have to do something about it. And what I'm going to do is to kill as many of you as possible. So actually, in today's America, not to mention in Europe, people still adhere to these particular Malthusian ideas. And that has a profound impact on one very important feature of American and Western life, and that is parental choices. A lot of men and women we now see in public opinion polls believe that it is a crime to bring new babies into the world, that it is a crime to have a child because their future is going to be horrible. There are even some people who believe that humanity is a cancer upon the planet. And what we are saying is, don't believe the doomsayers. Future doesn't have to be this bad. Of course, terrible things can happen, but whatever happens in the future, the horror will not come out of running out of resources. We have plenty, and we are going to continue to do so for many more years to come.
You're so right. There are people, I reported on this in the New York Times, there are people who subscribe to the New York Times because they're the only ones allowed to make these comments on articles. I don't want to bring children into the world to use precious resources. This is a common theme. It's like they don't care to know what is the truth. Look, you have a completely subversive subtitle, Infinitely Bountiful Planet, IBP. You cited Larry Summers as liking it. Larry Summers is on the left, like I'm an aardvark. I mean, Larry Summers was kicked out of the Harvard presidency for saying maybe women are less predetermined, in a sense, to love physics or astronomy. And just the thought, maybe it's worth considering it's not just sociological why there are fewer women in physics. And he was kicked out of the Harvard presidency. So he's not, I don't think most people on the left would like your book. Is that fair?
Probably, yes. It is probably. But I'm hoping to reach not just the center-right audience. I'm also hoping to reach people on the left who are open-minded about these ideas. I'm hoping to convince them about a rationally optimistic future. Look, we can create resources de novo. You said there are people in New York Times who talk about, parents not wanting to have children because of resources. Israel, for example, doesn't have any fresh water resources, but it desalinates. It reuses 92% of its water. Israel now, without much water reserves, is not only an agricultural superpower exporting agricultural produce to Europe, but it's producing enough water, fresh water, to supply the surrounding Arab countries. So, so long as you have smart people dedicated to doing something good, you don't actually need that many resources. Some of the world's richest countries have almost no resources. What does Holland have? Holland has a big wall to keep the sea from swallowing.
Well, wait. It has tulips.
It has tulips.
Yeah, no. You asked what Holland has. I'm answering.
Fair point. Hong Kong, what did Hong Kong have to become one of the richest countries in the world? It was just a port. Singapore.
These are great points. That's right. This is a great book. We'll be back in a moment. Superabundance. It's up at DennisPrager.com. My normal modus operandi is to have the final segment to myself, but I am too enthralled with my guest, to be honest. Marian Tupy, Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an IBP, infinitely bountiful planet. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. As many of you know, I take that book seriously. It turned out to be a good idea, didn't it? So the book is up at DennisPrager.com. I will now ask you non-book-oriented questions for a moment. Number one, why is there no Audible of your book?
Well, hopefully we are going to produce it soon, but we are still trying to figure out how to make audible so many numbers. I mean, the book is fundamentally an evidence-based.
Oh, interesting.
It is full of numbers showing that this left-wing obsession with running out of resources is nonsensical. So we try to be very evidence-based. So we'll see how that works out.
Okay, no, it's a plausible answer. I thank you. You were born in the Slovak part of Czechoslovakia?
That's correct.
So off the air, you told me you speak Czech and Slovak, and I said to you, I thought Slovaks were friendlier than Czechs, and you were not sure that that's the case. What is your take?
It's difficult to evaluate because I like the Czechs as much as I like the Slovaks. One of the great things about Czechoslovakia that it broke up without a civil war or animosity. It was more like a married couple that wasn't happy together, and so we just decided to call it quits. But we are the best of friends. I think the Czechs have a better sense of humor, but I will take your assessment and maybe say that we are friendlier.
Mm-hmm. I do a friendliness assessment. I've been to 130 countries, and so I have a sense of that aspect of people. Anyway, that's what I felt and I've been to both. By the way, for your interest, my field of study was Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and I went to Eastern Europe a lot under the Iron Curtain, and I went to Czechoslovakia a year after the Soviet invasion. When I was in my early 20s, I remember seeing bullet holes, artillery shell holes, in the streets of Prague. Well, your book is terrific. I think maybe you should do a PragerU video on this.
I would absolutely love to.
Good man. The book is Superabundance, up at DennisPrager.com. Thank you, sir.